The entire block was so quiet that their laughter echoed off the porch. My stepmother's heel dug into my arm, right next to the necklace she had just thrown onto the concrete. My father hissed that I was ungrateful, but as I looked up with a burning cheek, the door next house clicked open. The neighbor stepped out into the light, holding a file that proved she had been watching us for 6 months. My name is Nevaeh Torres. At 32 years old, I was the chief financial officer for Northgate Dynamics, a tech startup in Denver that had just closed a Series B funding round worth $40 million. I spent my days navigating complex fiscal cliffs, managing investor expectations, and ensuring that 200 employees got their paychecks on time. I was respected, I was competent, I was powerful. But as I turned my silver sedan onto the quiet, tree-lined street of my childhood home, none of that mattered. Here, under the sickly yellow glow of the suburban streetlights, I was just the divorced woman who had crawled back to her father's house. I was the failure. I was the bank account they bled dry while mocking the hand that fed them. It was 11:15 at night when I pulled into the driveway. The house looked pristine from the outside, a picture-perfect image of the American dream with its manicured lawn and the fresh coat of slate blue paint I had paid for 3 months ago. I turned off the engine, but I did not get out immediately. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles had turned white. Beside me on the passenger seat lay a thick manila envelope. It contained the truth. It contained photocopies of a second mortgage deed and loan documents that I had pulled from public records just hours ago. They were papers that should not exist, signed with a hand that looked suspiciously like mine, but definitely was not. I took a deep breath, grabbed the envelope, and shoved it deep into my leather tote bag. I needed to be calm. I needed to be the CFO, not the daughter. I stepped out into the cool Colorado air, the silence of the neighborhood pressing against my ears. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm breaks the sky apart. I unlocked the front door, hoping to slip upstairs to the guest room, my room, without incident. But the moment the latch clicked, the living room lights blazed on. They were waiting for me. Lydia, my stepmother, sat in the center of the brand-new velvet armchair I had purchased for her birthday. She looked every inch the suburban queen bee, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed even at midnight, wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first car. My father, Greg, stood by the fireplace, nursing a tumbler of whiskey, looking everywhere except at my eyes. And then there was Savannah, my 22-year-old half-sister, lounging on the sofa with her phone in hand, the blue light illuminating a smirk that made my stomach turn. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence," Lydia said, her voice dripping with that faux sweetness she used to mask the venom. "Working late again, Nevaeh? Or just avoiding your responsibilities here?" "I was working. Lydia," I said, my voice steady, though my heart hammered against my ribs. I clutched my bag tighter. "Someone has to pay the mortgage." It was the wrong thing to say. I knew it the moment the words left my lips. The air in the room shifted from passive aggression to active hostility. Lydia stood up, her movements sharp and jerky. "You ungrateful little brat," she spat, closing the distance between us. "You think throwing money around makes you the owner of this house? You think you can buy respect?" "I do not think I bought it," I replied, stepping back toward the door. "I think I earned it." "Earned it?" Savannah chimed in from the couch, not bothering to look up from her screen. "You are just a sad, lonely, divorced woman crashing at her daddy's house because her husband realized he could do better. You are a freeloader. Nevaeh, a guest who stayed too long." The audacity was breathtaking. I paid the electricity that charged her phone. I paid the water she used for her hour-long showers. I paid for the food in the fridge she raided. But before I could respond, Lydia lunged. She did not strike me, not yet. Instead, she grabbed the strap of my bag. "What are you hiding in there?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing. "You have been acting shady for weeks, sneaking around, hiding mail. Give it to me." "Let go, Lydia," I warned, pulling back. "It is my work property. You have no right." "I have every right. This is my house," she screamed. The struggle was brief but violent. Lydia was stronger than she looked, fueled by a rage I could never quite understand. She yanked the bag hard, pulling me off balance. I stumbled backward, the heel of my boot catching on the entryway rug. We spilled out the open front door, tumbling onto the concrete porch. The cool night air hit my face, followed instantly by the stinging slap of Lydia's hand across my cheek. It was not a playful slap. It was a heavy, open-palmed strike meant to humiliate. My head snapped to the side. I tasted copper in my mouth. I had fallen onto my hip, the rough concrete scraping through my dress slacks. My bag had fallen from my shoulder, spilling its contents partially onto the porch, though the manila envelope remained tucked inside. "Get up!" Lydia screeched, looming over me, distinctive shadow blocking out the porch light. "Look at you, pathetic, a 32-year-old woman rolling around on the ground." I looked up, dazed. My father had followed us out. He stood in the doorway, his drink still in his hand. He watched his wife strike his daughter, and he did absolutely nothing. "Dad?" I whispered. "You should not provoke her, Nevea," he mumbled, his voice slurred. "You know how she gets with her blood pressure. Why do you always have to cause trouble?" Savannah stepped out behind him, phone raised. She was recording. The little red light was a distinct, unblinking eye in the darkness. "This is going straight to my close friend's story," Savannah giggled. "Caption ideas? Maybe the leech gets salted?" Lydia kicked at my leg, her designer slipper connecting with my shin. It was not a blow meant to break bones, but it was an act of pure dominance. Then, she saw the gold necklace that had fallen out of my bag during the scuffle, a piece my mother had left me. Lydia snatched it up. "Is this where your money goes?" she sneered, holding it up to the light. "Buying jewelry while we struggle to keep this house decent?" "That was my mother's," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I was struggling to contain. "Give it back." "Your mother is dead," Lydia hissed, "and this house belongs to the living." She threw the necklace down. It hit the concrete with a hollow clinking sound, sliding toward the edge of the steps. Then, she stepped forward and ground her heel into my forearm, pinning me to the cold stone. "You are nothing here, Neve," Lydia spat, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. "You are just a bank account with legs, and frankly, we are tired of your attitude. You think you are so smart with your fancy job and your suits? You are just a child who could not keep a husband. This is not your house anymore, Nevea, you ungrateful wretch," my father hissed from the doorway, echoing his wife like a broken record. I looked up at them, the three of them, a tableau of cruelty. Lydia, red-faced and triumphant. Greg, weak and complicit. Savannah, viewing my pain through a camera lens, detached and amused. They were laughing now, a cruel, jagged sound that seemed to bounce off the quiet houses of the sleeping neighborhood. My cheek burned. My arm throbbed where her heel dug into my skin. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might shatter my ribs. But behind the shock, behind the physical pain, my mind was icy clear. I could feel the sharp corner of the manila envelope pressing against my side inside the bag I still clutched. They thought this was about dominance. They thought this was about breaking me. They had no idea that I had spent the last 8 hours analyzing a paper trail that would not just embarrass them, but could potentially put them in prison. Lydia pulled back, adjusting her robe, looking down at me with absolute disgust. She raised her voice, pitching it loud enough to carry to the street, performing for an invisible audience. "Tomorrow," she declared, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Tomorrow morning, you pack your trash and you get out. I want you gone. Take your drama and your failure somewhere else. Tomorrow. This divorced loser has to vanish from my house." Lydia and Savannah burst into laughter again, a high-pitched, manic sound. Even my father chuckled, a low, rumbling betrayal that hurt more than the slap. I lay there for a second, feeling the grit of the concrete against my palms. I did not cry. tears were for people who had no options. I had options. I had the truth. I looked up, meeting Lydia's gaze. I did not glare. I did not scream. I just stared at her with the terrifying calmness of a woman who knows exactly where the bodies are buried because she paid for the shovel. And then, the laughter stopped, or rather, it was interrupted. Click. The sound was sharp and mechanical, cutting through the humid night air like a gunshot. It came from the left. The laughter died in their throats. We all turned. The front door of the house next to ours, the house that belonged to Mrs. Cooper, swung open. For years, Marlene Cooper had been a fixture of the neighborhood background. She was a widow in her 60s who tended her hydrangeas, waved politely when she got her mail, and kept to herself, to Lydia and Savannah. She was the old cat lady. To my father, she was irrelevant. They thought she was deaf to the screaming matches, blind to the financial abuse, oblivious to the way they treated me. They were wrong. A beam of crisp white LED light flooded from her entryway, cutting across our lawn and illuminating our porch like a stage spotlight. Marlene stepped out. She was not wearing her usual gardening apron. She was dressed in a dark, structured coat that looked severe and official. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight bun. But it was what was in her hands that froze the blood in Lydia's veins. In her right hand, held steady and high, was a smartphone. The camera lens pointed directly at us. In her left hand, tucked securely under her arm, was a thick, black binder. She did not look like a kindly grandmother. She looked like an executioner who had grown tired of waiting for the trial. Lydia blinked, momentarily stunned. "Marlene, go back inside. This is a private family matter." Marlene did not lower the phone. She walked to the edge of her property line, her movements fluid and deliberate. She stopped exactly where the hedge divided our lots. Private? Marlene's voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that silenced the wind. It was a voice stripped of all neighborly warmth. It was the voice of someone who knew exactly what she was seeing. There is nothing private about assault, Lydia, and there is certainly nothing private about fraud. Savannah lowered her phone, her mouth hanging open. My father took a half step back into the shadows, his survival instinct kicking in. Marlene shifted her gaze to me, her eyes softening for just a fraction of a second before hardening again as she looked back at my stepmother. "I have been watching you for 6 months, Lydia," Marlene said, her tone conversational yet terrifying. "I have heard every scream. I have seen every time you forced that girl to pay a bill you claimed you could not afford while you carried in shopping bags from the mall. And tonight, I have everything I need." She tapped the black binder under her arm. "Enough," Marlene said, and the word landed with the weight of a gavel strike. "I think it is time we talked about this house. To understand how I ended up on the concrete porch with a bruised arm and a burning cheek. You have to rewind the clock. You have to go back to a few hours before the violence, before the neighbor's door opened, to a moment that should have been the highlight of my year. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. I was sitting in my corner office at Northgate Dynamics, watching the Denver skyline dissolve into a twilight of indigo and charcoal. My phone buzzed against the mahogany desk. It was a message from the CEO, a man who rarely texted unless the building was on fire or we had just made a fortune. "Board approved the promotion. VP of Finance. Salary bump is significant. Let's talk equity on Monday. You earned this. Navaya." I remember staring at the screen, letting the breath hiss out of my lungs. Vice President. It was the kind of validation I had been chasing for a decade, the kind that usually comes with champagne toasts and celebratory dinners. I did the mental math quickly. The raise was substantial. It meant I could finally accelerate my savings plan. It meant I could finally afford to move out of the house that was slowly suffocating me. I packed up my things, feeling a momentary surge of pride, but as I walked to the elevator, that pride began to curdle into anxiety. I was not going home to a husband who would pop a bottle of wine. I was not going home to an empty, peaceful apartment. I was going back to the suburbs, to a house where my success was not celebrated, but harvested. I drove home in silence, The transition from the high-stakes world of venture capital to the quiet desperation of my father's house always felt like physical whiplash. I had moved back in 14 months ago. It was supposed to be temporary. That is what I told myself. And that is what I told them. My marriage had imploded in a way that was quiet, sterile, and utterly devastating. We had no children. Just a lot of silence and a realization that we were strangers. When the divorce was finalized, I felt untethered. My mother had passed away from cancer when I was a sophomore in college, leaving me with a deep, unhealed wound. I found myself craving family. I craved connection. So, when my father suggested I take the guest room for a while to get back on my feet, it sounded like a sanctuary. I should have looked closer at the sanctuary. My father, Greg, had remarried 5 years prior. Lydia was a woman who wore pearls to the grocery store and spoke in a voice that was always half an octave too high, as if she were constantly delighted by the world. She was a former real estate agent who had not sold a house in a decade, but still talked about the market with unearned authority. And then there was Savannah, her daughter, my half-sister. Savannah was 22, beautiful in a manufactured, Instagram filter sort of way, and possessed an ambition that was entirely focused on becoming famous for doing absolutely nothing. When I first arrived, carrying 3 suitcases and a heart full of grief, the house was crumbling, literally. The roof leaked in the hallway. The furnace rattled like a dying beast. The kitchen hadn't been updated since the 90s. I sat them down at the old, scratched dining table that first week. We made a deal, a verbal contract between adults, or so I thought. I will cover the renovation costs. I had told them, my voice thick with the need to be useful, to be wanted. I will handle the property taxes, the overdue credit card debt you guys mentioned, and the utilities. In exchange, I stay here rent-free until I find my own place. It helps you upgrade the asset, and it helps me save for a down payment on a condo downtown. Lydia had clasped her hands together, her eyes shimmering with tears that I now realize were as fake as the diamond on her finger. "Oh, Neve," she had cooed, "you are a godsend, a true savior for this family. Your mother would be so proud of you." My father had just nodded, looking relieved. "It is good to have you home, kiddo." That was the honeymoon phase. Over the next year, I poured money into that house. I replaced the roof. That was $18,000. I installed a new HVAC system because Greg complained about the draft hurting his back. That was another $12,000. I gutted the kitchen, putting in quartz countertops and stainless steel appliances because Lydia said she wanted to cook more healthy meals for the family. That was $35,000. I paid for it all, every nail, every shingle, every kilowatt of electricity. But slowly, subtly, the dynamic shifted. It started about 4 months in. I was working late one night when Lydia came into my room with a cup of herbal tea. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking concerned. "Neve, honey," she started, smoothing her skirt. "Your father and I were talking. It is so chaotic having bills coming from all directions. You paying some, us paying others. It stresses Greg out. You know his blood pressure is tricky." "I can just set up autopay," I had suggested. No, Lydia waved a hand. "I was thinking, for the sake of simplicity, why do you not just transfer a lump sum to the joint household account every month? I will manage the distributions. I am used to handling the books, you know. It lets you focus on your big important job." It sounded logical. I was working 60 hours a week. I did not want to spend my weekends reconciling utility bills. So I agreed. I started transferring $4,000 a month into their account, on top of the renovation costs. Then came the filing cabinet. My father had a home office that he rarely used. One Saturday, I went in to look for my birth certificate. The cabinet was locked. "Lydia has the key," my father said from his recliner in the living room. The television was blaring a golf tournament. "Why is it locked, Dad?" "She likes to keep things organized," he mumbled, not looking away from the screen. "She is the lady of the house. Nevaeh, just let her handle it." Greg had changed. He had retired early from his job at the logistics firm, citing chronic back pain, but I noticed the pain only seemed to flare up when there was work to be done. The rest of the time, he was a shadow, drifting between the television and the liquor cabinet. He had handed his spine over to Lydia along with his wallet. "Lydia knows best," became his mantra. "Lydia will take care of it." By the time I reached the 6-month mark, I was no longer the savior. I was the ATM. I would come home to find Savannah wearing new clothes that I knew she could not afford on her zero income. I would see boxes from high-end boutiques in the recycling bin. When I asked about them, Lydia would smile that tight, plastic smile and say, "Oh, Savannah's father sent her a little gift," but I knew Savannah's biological father had not been in the picture for a decade. The gratitude evaporated. In its place grew a sense of entitlement that was breathtaking in its scope. I was paying the mortgage, the taxes, the insurance, and their lifestyle. Yet I was treated like an intruder. If I left a mug in the sink, Lydia would leave a passive-aggressive note. If I parked in the driveway, Savannah would complain that her friends had nowhere to park. The house I had renovated was beautiful now. The slate blue paint gleamed. The kitchen was magazine-worthy, and Lydia paraded it around like a trophy. She hosted book clubs and neighborhood watches, acting the part of the benevolent matriarch. I heard her once, standing in the foyer with a group of women. "Yes, we finally got around to redoing the kitchen," she said, her voice carrying up the stairs. "Greg and I wanted something that reflected our taste." Not a word about me. Not a word about the $35,000 I had wired to the contractor. I was erased from the narrative of the very home I was sustaining. But someone was paying attention. Mrs. Cooper, Marlene. She lived in the house directly to the east, a small, neat bungalow that looked like it had been frozen in 1985. Marlene was a widow who spent her days waging war against dandelions. For the first few months, our interactions were limited to polite nods over the fence. But as things in my house grew tenser, Marlene became more present. One Saturday morning, about 3 weeks before the incident on the porch, I was out checking the mail. I had just intercepted a letter from the bank addressed to my father, but before I could open it, Lydia had snatched it from my hand, claiming she was collecting the recycling. I was standing there, fuming, staring at the closed front door, when a voice spoke from the hedges. "They are getting bold, aren't they?" I jumped. Marlene was standing there, holding a pair of garden shears. She was wearing a sun hat and dirty gloves, but her eyes were sharp, intelligent. "Excuse me?" I asked. "The renovations," Marlene said, gesturing vaguely at our roof. "Must have cost a fortune. Greg tells everyone he cashed in a 401k, but I know Greg. He cashed that in 5 years ago to buy that boat he never uses." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. "I am helping them out. Mrs. Cooper, it is family." Marlene stepped closer to the fence. She lowered her voice. "You seem like a smart girl, Nevaeh. You wear nice suits. You drive a nice car. But you are walking around with a blindfold on." "I do not know what you mean." "Who owns the house?" Marlene asked. It was a direct, piercing question. "My father does," I said automatically. "And Lydia?" Marlene pursed her lips. She looked at the house, then back at me. "Are you sure? Because in this state, property records are public, and sometimes people get desperate, especially people who like to play rich, but have not earned a dime in 20 years. She did not wait for an answer. She just clipped a dead rose head, the metal shears making a decisive snip sound. "You should check the county clerk's website, dear, just for peace of mind." I brushed her off at the time. I told myself she was just a nosy neighbor, a bored widow looking to stir up drama. But the seed was planted. It sat in the pit of my stomach, growing roots every time Lydia bought a new purse or Greg avoided my gaze. Tonight, sitting in my car, that seed had bloomed into a terrifying flower of realization. Earlier this evening, after I got the text about my promotion, I did what Marlene suggested. I stayed late at the office, not to work, but to investigate. I used the company's high-speed internet to access the county property records. I searched for my father's address. What I found made the blood drain from my face. There was the original mortgage, almost paid off. And then, there was a second mortgage, a massive home equity line of credit taken out 4 months ago. The amount was for $150,000. But it was the names on the document that stopped my heart. Borrowers: Gregory Torres, Lydia Torres, and Nevaeh Torres. My name. My name was on a loan I had never applied for. My name was securing a debt I knew nothing about. I pulled up the scanned signature page. There it was, Nevaeh Torres. The loop of the N was slightly off. The slant was too vertical. It was a forgery. A good one. But a forgery nonetheless. The date of the signing was October 12th. I checked my calendar. On October 12th, I was in Chicago for a tech conference. I had the plane tickets and hotel receipts to prove it. They had stolen my identity. They had leveraged my credit score, my pristine, hard-earned credit score, to drain the equity out of the house I was paying to fix. That was what was in the manila envelope sitting on the passenger seat. That was the weight pressing against my ribs. As I sat in the car, moments before walking into the ambush, the pieces clicked together. The intercepted mail, the locked filing cabinet, Lydia's insistence on managing the accounts, the sudden influx of cash for Savannah's lifestyle. They were not just mooching off me, they were actively robbing me. They had committed a felony and were sleeping soundly down the hall from their victim. I looked out the car window at Marlene's house. The lights were off. Save for a faint glow from the porch, I wondered if she knew the specifics. I wondered why a retired gardener would know so much about property law. I had no idea that inside that dark house, Marlene was not sleeping. She was waiting. I took a deep breath, grabbed the bag with the evidence, and opened the car door. I walked up the driveway to the house that was legally partially mine, though I had never consented to it. I walked toward the confrontation that would end with me on the ground, bleeding, and my family laughing. But as I put my key in the lock, I was not afraid. I was furious. And I knew one thing they did not. The laughter was about to end. The weeks leading up to that night on the porch were defined by a suffocating, gelatinous tension that seemed to coat every surface of the house. It was not the loud, screaming kind of conflict. It was quieter, more insidious. It was the kind of atmosphere where you could hear a pin drop, but you knew that if you bent down to pick it up, someone would kick you in the ribs. I began to notice the silence first. Before, when I walked into a room, the conversation would flow naturally, but now, whenever I entered the kitchen or the living room, the air would snap shut. It happened on a Tuesday evening, just after I had come home from a grueling 10-hour day at the office. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, my heels clicking on the tile floor I had paid to have installed 4 months ago. Lydia and Savannah were huddled over the kitchen island. Their heads were close together, whispering urgently. The moment they heard my footsteps, they sprang apart as if they had been electrocuted. Lydia's hand moved with the speed of a striking cobra. She swept a stack of papers off the counter and shoved them violently into the junk drawer, slamming it shut with her hip. The sound of the drawer colliding with the frame echoed in the sudden quiet. "Hey," I said, pausing by the refrigerator. "Is everything okay?" Lydia turned to me. Her smile stretched so tight it looked painful. Her eyes were darting around the room, landing everywhere except on my face. "Oh, Nevaeh, you startled us," she laughed. A brittle, high-pitched sound. "Everything is fine. Just sorting through some old recipes. You know how messy things get." "Recipes?" I asked, eyeing the drawer. "I thought I saw a bank logo." "Don't be silly," Savannah chimed in, leaning back against the counter and crossing her arms. She was wearing a new silk blouse that I knew retailed for at least $200. "Mom was just showing me a casserole recipe. You are so paranoid lately. It must be the stress of your job." They stared at me, a united front of denial. I filled my water glass, feeling their gazes burning into my back. I knew what a bank statement looked like. I knew the color of the envelopes from First National. But in that house, reality was whatever Lydia said it was. If she said the sky was green, my father would nod and ask what shade of emerald. That dinner was an exercise in endurance. We sat around the mahogany dining table, a table I had purchased for $3,500 because Lydia claimed the old one was embarrassing for guests. Lydia picked at her salad, her eyes gleaming with a malicious sort of amusement. "You know," she started, casually swirling her wine, "I was reading an article today about the housing market. They say a lot of young people are moving back in with their parents. It is a shame, really, a failure to launch." I kept cutting my chicken, my knife scraping against the porcelain. "I did launch, Lydia. I am here because I chose to help you guys out with the renovations." Of course, she waved her hand dismissively. "But still, a woman of your age, 32, divorced, no children, living in her father's guest room, it must be hard for you. Feeling like you have regressed. This house is so big. But sometimes I wonder if it is too much space for a woman who could not keep her own home." The insult was precise. It targeted my insecurities about my failed marriage and my current living situation. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "I am not clinging to anyone, Lydia," I said, my voice steady despite the rage boiling in my gut. "I pay the mortgage. I pay the utilities. I am hardly a burden." "Oh, don't get so defensive," she smirked. "I am just saying, maybe it is time you looked for a small apartment, something within your means. We would hate for you to feel like you are overstaying your welcome." My father, Greg, sat at the head of the table, chewing slowly. He did not look up. He did not defend me. He just kept eating the food I had paid for, in the house I was keeping warm. "Dad?" I asked. "Listen to Lydia, Nevaeh," he mumbled, reaching for the salt. "She just wants what is best for everyone." The gaslighting was absolute. I was the financier of their lives, yet they treated me like a stray dog they had graciously allowed to sleep on the porch. The financial discrepancies were becoming impossible to ignore. I was meticulous with my own budget. I tracked every penny, but Savannah, who had not held a job since a 2-week stint at a frozen yogurt shop 3 years ago, was suddenly living the life of an influencer. I saw it on social media first. I was scrolling through Instagram on my lunch break when Savannah's story popped up. "Weekend vibes in Aspen," the caption read. The video showed a panoramic view from a luxury suite balcony, overlooking the snowy peaks. Then it cut to a close-up of a dinner table laden with oysters and expensive wine. Then a shot of a new designer handbag, a quilted leather clutch that I knew cost at least $2,000. I sat in my office, staring at the phone. $2,000. That was exactly the amount I had transferred to the joint account last week for emergency plumbing repairs that Lydia claimed were needed for the master bathroom. When I got home that evening, I walked past the master bathroom. The door was open. The floor was dry. There were no tools, no new pipes, no sign of any plumber. I found Savannah in the living room, unboxing a pair of sunglasses. "Nice trip to Aspen," I said, leaning against the doorframe. She jumped, quickly hiding the box behind a cushion. "Oh, yeah, it was just a day trip. My friend drove." "And the hotel suite?" "We knew the manager. We got a deal." "And the bag?" "A gift," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "Why are you so obsessed with my life? You are just jealous because you spend all your time looking at spreadsheets and I'm actually living." "I am asking, Savannah, because I am the one putting money into this house, and things aren't adding up." "You are crazy," she spat, grabbing her things and storming upstairs. "Mom says you are getting obsessive. She is right." The isolation deepened. I felt like a ghost in my own home. I would walk into a room and find that my presence erased all warmth. But the most painful moment wasn't the theft. It was the erasure of my contribution. It happened on a Saturday afternoon. I was in the garden, weeding the flower beds near the front window. The window was open, and I could hear voices inside. Lydia was hosting tea for a new neighbor, a woman named Mrs. Higgins. "Your home is just lovely, Lydia," Mrs. Higgins was saying. "That sofa is exquisite. Is it Italian leather?" I froze. That sofa was a $4,000 piece from Restoration Hardware. I had saved for 2 months to buy it because the old one smelled like mildew. "Oh, thank you," Lydia's voice floated out, dripping with false modesty. "Yes, it was a gift from my brother in California. He knows how much I love design. And the dining table? That has been in my family for generations. We just had it restored." I sat back on my heels, dirt staining my knees. It was a lie, a bold, unnecessary lie. She was claiming ownership of everything I had provided. She was building a narrative where she was the wealthy, tasteful matriarch, and I simply did not exist. I stood up, wiping my hands on my jeans, intending to march in there and correct her, but I stopped. What would it achieve? She would call me hysterical. She would say I was making a scene. My father would sigh and look at the floor. I went to find my father instead. He was in the garage, tinkering with a broken lawnmower. "Dad," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice, "we need to talk about the finances. I need to see the bank statements for the joint account. I want to see where the renovation money is going." He did not look up. He kept wrenching a bolt that was already tight. "Lydia handles the books, Nevaeh. You know that." "I know she handles them, but I am funding them. I have a right to see the ledger." "Why do you have to be so difficult?" He dropped the wrench with a clatter. He turned to me, his face red, but not with anger, with guilt. "She takes care of me. She takes care of this house. Why can't you just trust us? You have plenty of money. Why are you counting pennies?" "It is not about pennies, Dad. It is about thousands of dollars. It is about honesty." "My back is killing me," he groaned, rubbing his lumbar spine, the universal signal that the conversation was over. "I cannot deal with this stress today. Just talk to Lydia." But I couldn't talk to Lydia. Lydia was a fortress of denial. The breaking point, the moment my suspicion turned into cold, hard certainty, came with the mail. It was a Thursday morning. I had taken a half-day off to go to the dentist. I was pulling out of the driveway when the mail carrier, a friendly man named Stan, walked up. "Morning, Nevaeh," he waved. "Got a stack for you guys today." I rolled down the window. "Thanks, Stan. I will take it." He handed me a bundle of letters. I began to flip through them. Utility bill, coupon flyer, magazine for Greg, and then, nestled in the middle, was a white envelope. It had the logo of a major mortgage lender, not the one who held the original mortgage on the house. In the clear plastic window, I saw my name, Nevaeh Torres, and below it, in bold red letters, "Second notice, action required." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had never applied for a loan with this bank. Before I could open it, the front door of the house flew open. Lydia sprinted down the driveway. I had never seen her move that fast. She was breathless, her eyes wild. "I will take that," she gasped, reaching through my open car window. "Lydia, wait," I said, pulling the stack away. "There is something here for me, from the bank." "Oh, that?" She laughed, but it was a breathless, panicked sound. She lunged and snatched the entire stack from my hand, tearing the paper slightly. "That is just junk mail. Pre-approved credit card offers. They send them to everyone. I told Stan to stop delivering them." It said second notice, Lydia. "Marketing tactics," she insisted, clutching the mail to her chest like a shield. "They try to scare you into opening it. Trust me, I was in real estate. I know how these things work. You go to your appointment, I will sort this out." She turned and marched back to the house, walking briskly, almost running. She did not look back. I sat in my idling car, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. That was not marketing. Marketing did not come in an envelope marked "Second Notice." Marketing did not make a woman run down a driveway in her slippers. That evening, the atmosphere in the house changed from tense to sinister. When I walked in, the mail was gone. The recycling bin was empty. Lydia was humming in the kitchen, chopping vegetables with aggressive precision. Savannah was on the couch, but she did not look at her phone. She watched me. They were watching me. I went out to the front yard to water the hydrangeas, just to escape the suffocating air inside. The sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across the lawn. I heard the distinctive sound of a hose turning on next door. I looked over the low hedge. Marlene Cooper was there. She was watering her roses, her movements slow and deliberate. She was wearing a dark cardigan, and her face was unreadable. She caught my eye. Usually, she would smile or comment on the weather. Tonight, she did not smile. She walked over to the fence, dragging the hose behind her. She looked at the house behind me, my father's house, then looked directly into my eyes. "Neve," she said. Her voice was low, barely a whisper over the sound of the water. "Hi, Mrs. Cooper." "I saw what happened this morning," she said, "with the mail." I froze. "You did?" "I see a lot of things," she said enigmatically. She paused, looking around to make sure we were alone. Then she leaned in closer, her gaze intense and piercing. "Let me ask you a question, child, and I want you to think about it very carefully before you go to sleep tonight." "What is it?" I asked, my throat dry. "Are you sure," Marlene said, articulating every syllable, "that you know exactly who owns this house?" She did not wait for an answer. She turned off her hose nozzle, the water cutting off with a sharp click. She turned and walked back into her house, leaving me standing alone on the sidewalk as the twilight deepened into night. That question chased me into the house. It followed me up the stairs. It sat on the end of my bed as I lay awake at 3 a.m. Who owns this house? I looked at the ceiling I had paid to paint. I listened to the hum of the HVAC system I had paid to install. Down the hall, I heard a floorboard creak, then a whisper, then a low, stifled laugh. It was Lydia and Savannah. They were awake too. I realized then that I was not just a guest they were tolerating. I was not just a daughter they were annoyed with. I was the mark. I was the prey in a trap that had been set months ago, and the jaws were just beginning to close. The air in the room felt thin, insufficient to fill my lungs. I got up and locked my bedroom door. It was a flimsy lock, one that could be popped with a hairpin, but it was the only barrier I had left. I lay back down, but I did not close my eyes. I stared at the door handle, waiting for it to turn. I knew then that the time for being the good daughter was over. If I wanted to survive, I had to stop trusting and start hunting. The next morning, I called in sick to work. It was the first time in 5 years I had done so when I was not actually running a fever. But I knew I could not focus on balance sheets and investor calls while my own life was capsizing. I needed clarity. I needed a sanctuary where the walls did not have ears. And I needed the one person who would tell me the truth, even if it hurt. I met Riley Morgan at a small, industrial chic coffee shop in downtown Denver called The Press. We had been friends since our freshman year at university, bonding over cheap ramen and a shared hatred for statistics classes. Now, Riley was a senior paralegal at a boutique law firm that specialized in estate planning and family law. She was sharp, cynical in the way you have to be in her line of work, and fiercely loyal. I sat in the back corner, nursing a black coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago, when Riley walked in, wearing a sharp blazer and carrying a briefcase that looked like it could double as a weapon. I felt my shoulders drop about 2 inches. "You look terrible," Riley said as she slid into the booth opposite me. She did not offer a hug. She knew I needed answers more than affection right now. "Good morning to you too," I muttered, pushing my sunglasses up onto my head. Riley signaled the barista for an espresso, then leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "Okay, spill it. Your text said emergency and possible fraud. I canceled a lunch with a client for this, so do not leave out a single detail." I took a deep breath and told her everything. I started with the renovation costs that I had paid for but got no credit for. I talked about the weird secrecy with the mail, the locked filing cabinet, and the way Lydia had sprinted down the driveway in her slippers to intercept the bank letter. I told her about Savannah's sudden influx of designer goods and expensive trips. Finally, I told her about Marlene Cooper, the neighbor, and her haunting question, "Are you sure you know who owns this house?" Riley listened without interrupting. She did not gasp. She did not look shocked. She just stared at me with an intensity that made me uncomfortable, her mind already cataloging the facts into legal categories. When I finished, there was a long silence. The espresso machine hissed in the background. "Neve," Riley said, her voice low and serious. "I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to think very hard before you answer. Have you ever signed a power of attorney? Or any document giving your father or Lydia the right to act on your behalf?" "No," I said immediately. "Never. I handle my own finances. I have never given them access." Riley narrowed her eyes. "Are you sure? Think back. Maybe a few years ago? Maybe when you first moved back in? Sometimes these things are buried in a stack of other papers." I opened my mouth to say no again, but then my memory snagged on something. A cold shiver went down my spine. It was 3 years ago. I had just moved back into the house. It was a chaotic morning. I was running late for a board meeting, trying to find my car keys, and Lydia had cornered me in the kitchen. She looked frantic, holding a thick stack of papers. Recalled memory. "Neve, honey, please, I need your help," Lydia had pleaded, shoving a pen into my hand. "The property tax assessment came in, and they made a huge mistake. They are overcharging us by $3,000. Greg is freaking out. I need to file this appeal today or we lose the window." "Okay, so file it," I had said, checking my watch. "I can't," she had cried. "Since you are living here now and contributing to the bills, the accountant said we need to list you as a resident contributor to get the homestead exemption extension. It is just a formality. Just sign here, here, and here, please, or your father is going to have a stroke from the stress." I was 20 minutes late. My phone was buzzing with emails. I trusted her. She was family. I grabbed the pen and scribbled my signature on 3 different pages marked with sticky notes. I did not read the text. I just signed and ran out the door. "Oh my God," I whispered, the color draining from my face. I looked at Riley. 3 years ago, a tax appeal. Or at least, she said it was a tax appeal. She said it was for a homestead exemption. "Did you read it?" Riley asked, though she already knew the answer. "No, I was late for work." Riley let out a sharp breath and rubbed her temples. "Okay, that is the oldest trick in the book. The emergency signature. They catch you when you are distracted, create a false sense of urgency, and leverage your trust. That could have been anything. It could have been a power of attorney. It could have been a quitclaim deed adding you to the title so they could use your credit. It could have been a loan application. But that was 3 years ago," I argued, trying to find a lifeline. "This bank letter came yesterday. Documents like that can sit dormant until they are needed," Riley said. "Or, more likely, that signature gave them the legal foothold to start building a profile on you. But we do not need to guess. Public records are public for a reason." She pulled a notepad out of her bag and clicked her pen. "Here is the plan. You are going to go home. You are going to act normal. Do not confront them. Do not ask about the mail. If Lydia asks where you were, say you had a migraine and went to urgent care. Tonight, when everyone is asleep, you are going to go to the county assessor's website and the clerk and recorder's database. You are going to search for the property address, and then you are going to search for your own name." "What am I looking for?" "Everything," Riley said grimly. "Deeds of trust, mortgages, liens. If your name is on the title, it will show up. If there is a loan in your name, it will be recorded against the property." I felt sick. "And if I find something?" Riley reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her grip was firm. "If you find something, you document it. You take screenshots. You print it out. And then we go to war. But Nevaeh, you have to be stone cold. If they catch wind that you are digging, they might shred physical evidence or try to guilt you into signing something else to cover their tracks. You have to be a ghost." The drive home felt like a funeral procession. I pulled into the driveway and sat there for a moment, looking at the house. It did not look like a home anymore. It looked like a crime scene. I played my part perfectly. I walked in, holding my head, and told Lydia I had a terrible migraine and needed to sleep it off. She looked relieved that I wasn't asking questions about the mail. She even offered to make me soup, a gesture that now felt sickeningly manipulative. I spent the afternoon in my room with the door locked and the lights off, waiting for the sun to go down. I listened to the sounds of the house. I heard Savannah laughing on the phone. I heard the clink of ice in my father's glass at 4 o'clock. Normal sounds. The soundtrack of a family that was cannibalizing one of its own. At 1 o'clock in the morning, the house was finally silent. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen's blue light felt incredibly bright in the darkness. I turned the brightness down to the lowest setting. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I felt like I was breaking into a bank, but the vault I was cracking was my own life. I navigated to the county clerk and recorder's website. My heart was thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Search by address 428 Maplewood Drive. The page loaded. A list of documents appeared. I scrolled past the original mortgage from 20 years ago. I scrolled past a release of lien from 10 years ago. And then I saw it. Document type, deed of trust, recording date, July 15th of this year. Grantor, Gregory Torres, Lydia Torres, Nevaeh Torres. Grantee, Apex Horizon Lending Group. Amount, $150,000. I stared at the screen. The number seemed to dance before my eyes. $150,000. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. They hadn't just borrowed a little money. They had taken out a massive second mortgage, and my name was right there listed as a grantor. That meant legally, I was a co-owner of the property, and I was also fully liable for the debt. I clicked on the PDF icon to view the actual document. The scanned pages loaded slowly, agonizingly. I scrolled to the signature page. There they were, my father's signature, shaky and small, Lydia's signature, large and looping, and there, on the third line, was my name. Nevaeh Torres. I leaned in closer, squinting at the pixels. It looked like my signature. It really did. It had the same slant, the same loop on the H. If I were a bank clerk, I would not have doubted it for a second. But then I looked at the date next to the signature. Date of signing, October 12th. I froze. October 12th. I quickly opened a new tab and logged into my work email. I searched for my travel itinerary from last month. Confirmation. TechCon. Chicago. Flight departing Denver, October 11th. Flight returning Denver, October 14th. On October 12th, I was sitting in a conference hall in downtown Chicago, listening to a keynote speech on cybersecurity. I was 1,000 miles away from the notary public in Denver, who had supposedly witnessed me signing this document. It was a forgery, a sophisticated, deliberate forgery. But that was not all. I went back to the search results. There was another document, recorded on the same day. Document type, promissory note, borrower, Nevaeh Torres. I clicked it. This document detailed the terms of the loan. It was a high-interest loan, the kind you get from predatory lenders who don't ask too many questions as long as there is equity in the house. I realized then why they needed me. My father's credit was ruined from years of mismanagement. Lydia had no income. They could never have qualified for a loan of this size on their own. They needed a third borrower. They needed someone with a high credit score and a high income. They needed me. They had used my credit worthiness, the reputation I had built with years of hard work and discipline, to secure a loan that they were now blowing on designer bags and Aspen trips. And the worst part? The loan had a balloon payment clause. If they missed 3 consecutive payments, the interest rate tripled. If they defaulted, the bank would take the house, and since my name was on the loan, the bank would come after my assets, my wages, and my future to recover the debt. They had not just stolen from me, they had strapped a financial bomb to my chest and were playing with matches. I felt a cold rage settle over me. It was heavier than the sadness I had felt earlier. It was solid, indestructible. I connected my laptop to the wireless printer in my room. I printed every single page: the deed of trust, the promissory note, the notary acknowledgement, the recording receipt. Then, I took screenshots of my flight itinerary, my hotel receipt from Chicago, and the conference badge photo I had posted on LinkedIn on October 12th. I compiled everything into a secure folder. I encrypted it. Then I emailed the entire file to Riley. My phone buzzed a moment later. It was Riley. She was awake. Riley. I just got the file. I'm looking at it now. 3 minutes passed. The longest 3 minutes of my life. Riley. This is it. Nev. The date stamps don't lie. You were in Chicago. The notary who stamped this just committed a felony, and your father and stepmother committed bank fraud, identity theft, and forgery. This is not a civil dispute anymore. This is prison time. I typed back, my fingers trembling slightly. Neva, what do I do? Riley. You do nothing. Yet, we need one more thing. We need to prove they are the ones who spent the money. We need to link the funds from this loan to their personal accounts. But for now, you have the smoking gun. Tomorrow, you need to go to work like normal. Do not let them see you sweat. If they suspect you know, they might run or try to destroy devices. We need to blindside them. I closed my laptop. I sat in the dark, listening to the silence of the house. I looked around my room. I looked at the walls I had paid to paint. I thought about the kitchen downstairs with the quartz countertops I had chosen. I thought about the HVAC system keeping us warm. For months, I had been desperate for their approval. I had wanted to be part of the family. I had wanted my father to look at me with pride. I had wanted Lydia to accept me. Now that desire was gone. It had been incinerated by the glowing pixels of a PDF document. The word family felt like ash in my mouth. It was a meaningless syllable. I looked at the door to my room. Just outside. My father was sleeping. He had signed his name right next to the forgery of mine. He had watched me pay the bills for months, knowing full well he had already mortgaged my future behind my back. I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The neighbor's house was dark. Marlene was asleep, but I knew she was right. She had tried to warn me. Are you sure you know who owns this house? I knew now. On paper, I owned it, or at least, the debt belonged to me. But in reality, this house was a prison, and tonight, I had just found the key to the cell. I was not going to just walk out. I was going to burn the prison down, brick by legal brick. I crawled back into bed, but I did not sleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, rehearsing the lines I would say when the time came. I was no longer the victim. I was the prosecution, and court was about to be in session. The following afternoon, the air in the house was thick enough to choke on. I had returned from work early, pleading a headache, but in reality, I needed to be inside the perimeter. I needed to see the enemy up close. My father and Lydia thought I was asleep upstairs, but I was sitting at the top of the landing, hidden by the shadows of the linen closet, listening. Downstairs, the television was on, but the volume was low. Above the murmur of a news anchor, I heard voices rising from the den. We have to make the first installment by the 15th. Greg's voice was tight, vibrating with a nervous energy I had never heard before. The bank sent a confirmation to the email on file. What if she sees it? What if she checks the spam folder? She is not going to check the spam folder. Greg, Lydia snapped. Her voice was dismissive, the tone of a woman managing an unruly child. Nevaeh is too busy playing the big corporate executive. She thinks she is above the little details. Besides, I changed the recovery email to mine yesterday. You worry too much. It is $150,000. Lydia, my father hissed. That is not a little detail. If she finds out we signed her name... She won't, Lydia interrupted, her voice dropping to a lethal whisper that carried up the stairs more clearly than a shout. By the time she realizes anything is wrong, we will have moved the money, paid off Savannah's debts, and restructured the loan. And if she does make a fuss, who are they going to believe? The parents who took her in when she was broken, or the bitter divorced woman who is trying to evict her own father? We control the narrative. Greg, stop sweating. I pressed my back against the wall, closing my eyes. Hearing it confirmed out loud was different from seeing it on paper. It was visceral. My father wasn't just a passive participant. He was terrified of getting caught. But he was still going along with it. He was more afraid of Lydia than he was ashamed of betraying me. Later that evening, the front door slammed open. Savannah breezed in, bringing a gust of cold air and the scent of expensive perfume. She was carrying 3 large shopping bags from the Cherry Creek Mall. The logos were unmistakable. Gucci, Neiman Marcus. I was in the kitchen, making tea, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the kettle. Savannah didn't see me at first. She walked straight to the counter where Lydia was cutting limes for a gin and tonic. "Mom, you are literally a magician," Savannah gushed, dropping the bags on the floor with a heavy thud. The card went through without a hitch. The sales lady looked at me like I was royalty. Seriously, this saved my life. I don't have to file for bankruptcy. I can finally breathe. "Keep your voice down," Lydia warned, nodding her head toward the hallway. "Oh, who cares?" Savannah laughed, pulling a pair of leather boots out of a box. "She is probably upstairs crying over her spreadsheets. Anyway, like I said, this house thing? Genius. I mean, we should have done it months ago. Why did we wait so long to leverage the—" She turned to grab a glass of water and froze. I was standing by the stove, the kettle whistling softly. I looked from the boots to Savannah's face, then to Lydia. "Leverage what, Savannah?" I asked. My voice was calm, dangerously calm. Savannah's mouth opened and closed like a fish. She looked at Lydia in panic. Lydia didn't miss a beat. She slammed the knife down on the cutting board. "Leverage the equity of our family bond," Lydia improvised, the lie so clumsy it was almost insulting. "Savannah is just grateful that we could help her with a small personal loan from our savings. Not that it is any of your business." "Right," Savannah stammered, snatching the boots back and clutching them to her chest. "A loan, from Mom and Dad, because they actually care about me." She glared at me, but there was fear in her eyes now. She grabbed her bags and scrambled out of the room, leaving a trail of tension in her wake. I looked at Lydia. Lydia picked up her gin and tonic, took a long sip, and stared me down. "Don't you have work to do, Neva?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just walked out the back door into the cool evening air. I needed to breathe. I stood by the hydrangeas, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The audacity was breathtaking. They were spending the money, my money, legally speaking, before the ink was even dry on the fraud. "You look like you're about to explode. Dear." The voice came from the other side of the fence. I turned. Marlene Cooper was standing there. She wasn't gardening this time. She was standing perfectly still, her hands clasped over the fence post, watching me with an expression that was both pitying and intense. "Mrs. Cooper," I managed to say, "I am just getting some air." "You have been getting a lot of air lately," she observed. She looked at the house behind me, where the lights were blazing, then back at me. "I think it is time you stopped standing in the yard and came inside. I have made a pot of chamomile tea, and I have some things on my kitchen table that belong to you." The phrase "belong to you" sent a shiver down my spine. I walked to the gate between our properties and stepped into her yard. It felt like crossing a border into a neutral country. Marlene's house was a sharp contrast to ours, where my father's house was filled with trendy, overpriced furniture and clutter. Marlene's was sparse, clean, and filled with the scent of lemon oil and old paper. We sat at a small oak table in her kitchen. "You think I am just the old lady who grows roses," Marlene said, pouring the tea. It wasn't a question. I don't know much about you, Mrs. Cooper," I admitted. "Marlene, please, and for 35 years. I wasn't a gardener. I was the senior clerk for the Denver County Civil Court. I handled probate, property disputes, and estate executions." She took a sip of her tea, her eyes sharp over the rim of the cup. "I know how to read a docket, Nevaeh, and I know how to spot a hustle when I see one." She reached under the table and pulled out a file. It wasn't the black binder I would see later. This was a manila folder, yellowed with age. "When your mother passed away," Marlene said softly. She and I were friendly, not close, but friendly. She was worried about you. She knew Greg was weak, and she knew he had a wandering eye, even back then. Marlene opened the folder. Inside was a photocopy of a document titled, Proposed Living Trust. Your mother wanted to put the house into a trust, Marlene explained, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. With you as the sole beneficiary, she wanted to ensure that if anything happened to her, Greg could live there, but the ownership would pass directly to you. She filed the preliminary paperwork with my office 2 weeks before she died. I felt a lump form in my throat. I touched the paper. It was my mother's handwriting. For Nevaeh, my heaven. What happened? I whispered. Greg stopped it, Marlene said, her voice hardening. He claimed she wasn't of sound mind in those final days. He threatened to drag the estate through probate hell if she signed it, so she didn't. She died believing he would do the right thing by you. She was wrong. I stared at the document. My father hadn't just stolen my credit. He had stolen my inheritance 10 years ago. The betrayal wasn't new. It was foundational. But that is ancient history, Marlene said, closing the folder. Let's talk about the present. She stood up and walked to a small cabinet in the corner of the kitchen. On top of it sat a monitor, displaying a grid of 4 camera feeds. I live alone, Nevaeh. I have security cameras covering every inch of my property, including the side yard that runs parallel to your front porch. She clicked a mouse. A video file opened on the screen. The timestamp was from 3 weeks ago. Turn the volume up, Marlene commanded. I watched the screen. It was a crisp, clear shot of my father's front porch. Lydia and Greg were sitting on the rocking chairs. Chairs I had bought. They were drinking wine. Video, Greg. I don't know. Lyd. A second mortgage? The rates are killer. Video. Lydia. Who cares about the rates? We aren't paying them. We use Nevaeh's credit info. I found her old tax returns in the filing cabinet. It is enough to pass the identity check with that online lender. We get the lump sum, pay off the credit cards, pay off Savannah's car, and then… Video, Greg. And then what? She is going to notice? Video. Lydia. We trigger the clause. We make life hell for her. We tell her the house is too small. We push her out. Once she is gone, she won't see the mail. We keep paying the minimums with her money until we can flip the place or sell it. By the time she figures it out, we will be in Florida. Video, Greg. Laughing nervously. You are wicked. Lydia, that is why I love you. So, we are really doing this? We are kicking the cash cow out? Video. Lydia. The cow has run dry. Greg, she is getting annoying. She walks around here like she owns the place just because she bought a new roof. It is time to remind her who the parents are. Marlene paused the video. The image froze on my father's face, mid-laugh. I sat there, frozen. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't blink. The cruelty was so casual. They weren't just desperate people making bad choices. They were predators. They were laughing about using me, draining me, and discarding me. They did not just steal from you, Marlene said, her voice low and furious. They conspired. That is conspiracy to commit fraud. That is identity theft. And because they discussed it right there, on my property line, while I was recording, it is admissible. I looked up at Marlene. My vision was blurry with unshed tears, but beneath the pain, something harder was forming. A steel spine I didn't know I had. Why are you showing me this? I asked. Why now? Because bullies hate exposure, Marlene said, and because I hated watching them treat you like a servant in your own mother's house. I have been waiting for you to wake up. Nevaeh, I saw you checking the records yesterday. I knew you were ready. I have a lawyer, I said, my voice gaining strength. My friend Riley. She has the loan documents. Good, Marlene nodded. Then you have the paper trail. Now you have the motive and the confession. I should call the police right now, I said, reaching for my phone. I should have them arrested tonight. Marlene reached out and gently lowered my hand. No, she said firmly. Not yet. Why? They are spending the money. Because right now, it is a mess of paperwork, Marlene explained, her eyes gleaming with tactical intelligence. If you call the police now, Lydia will spin a story. She will say it was a misunderstanding, or that you verbally authorized it. It will get tied up in investigation for months. You need them to hang themselves completely. How? Wait for the eviction, Marlene said. I heard them talking yesterday. They are planning a confrontation. They want to humiliate you. They want to throw you out publicly to establish dominance. They want to make you look like the crazy, ungrateful daughter so the neighbors don't ask questions when you disappear. She pointed to the monitor. Let them try. Let them drag you out onto that porch. Let them say the words, "This is our house," in front of witnesses. Let them commit the act of aggression. When they do that, we open the door. We hit them with everything. The fraud, the assault, the conspiracy, all at once. We don't just win the battle, Nevaeh. We end the war. I looked at the frozen image of my father laughing. I thought about the second notice envelope. I thought about my mother's trust document, buried for a decade. Okay, I whispered. We wait. It will be hard, Marlene warned. They are going to treat you like dirt for the next few days. They are going to try to break you so you leave voluntarily. They can try, I said. Standing up, I felt different. I felt dangerous. I can take it, because I know exactly how this story ends. Marlene smiled, a genuine, fierce smile. Go home, Nevaeh. Get some sleep. When the time comes, just look for my porch light. I will be watching. I walked back across the lawn in the dark. I entered the house through the back door. The kitchen was empty. I could hear Savannah and Lydia laughing upstairs. Let them laugh, I thought as I climbed the stairs to my room. Let them laugh as loud as they want. It would just make the silence that was coming all the more satisfying. I went to my room, hid the copy of the trust document under my mattress, and lay down. I didn't sleep, but I wasn't afraid anymore. I was simply counting down the hours. The war room was not a bunker deep underground. It was a kitchen table covered in a floral tablecloth, in a house that smelled of lavender and old books. The only light came from the low-hanging chandelier above us, casting long shadows across the documents that Riley had spread out like a winning poker hand. It was 3:00 in the afternoon on the day before the eviction. I had slipped out the back door while Lydia was napping and Greg was watching golf, crossing the small patch of grass that separated my hell from my haven. Riley Morgan stood at the head of the table, her blazer discarded on a chair, her sleeves rolled up. She looked less like my old college roommate and more like a general surveying a battlefield. Marlene sat opposite her, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, her eyes darting between the papers with terrifying precision. This is it, Riley said, tapping a finger on a printout. This is the kill shot, but we have to aim it perfectly. She picked up the document I had downloaded the night before. Here is the deed of trust, recorded July 15th, signed October 12th. The notarization seal claims that Nevaeh Torres appeared in person before the notary in Denver County. She slapped another piece of paper down next to it. And here is your flight manifest. United Airlines Flight 482 departed Denver International Airport at 8 in the morning on October 11th. Returned October 14th. You were in Chicago. You were physically, scientifically, and legally incapable of signing that document in Denver. It is forgery, I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. And identity theft. It is worse than that, Riley corrected, her voice hard. It is bank fraud. It is a federal offense. Lenders do not play around with this. Nevaeh, if we present this to the police, your father and Lydia aren't just looking at a lawsuit. They are looking at 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary. I looked at the papers. I thought about my father. I thought about the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who used to call me his little genius. Then I thought about the man who stood by while his wife slapped me, the man who signed his name next to a fake version of mine to steal my future. Do it, I said. My voice did not shake. Marlene leaned forward. The paperwork is solid, Riley, but juries and police officers respond to narratives. We have the what, but we need the why. Marlene pulled her iPad closer. I have gone through the footage from the last 6 months. I have clips of them discussing the loan. I have clips of Lydia practicing your signature. I even have a clip of Savannah joking about how easy it was to guess your security questions because you are so predictable. Riley's eyes widened. You have Lydia practicing the signature on video? On the back porch table. Marlene nodded grimly. Zoomed in. It is grainy, but you can clearly see her holding a driver's license, Nevaeh's license, and copying the stroke onto a notepad. That is malice, Riley whispered, a shark-like grin appearing on her face. That proves it wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was premeditated. But there is a catch, Marlene warned. She looked at me. If we go to the police right now, this afternoon, Lydia will spin it. She is a master manipulator. She will cry. She will say you gave her verbal permission and now you are just having buyer's remorse. She will muddy the waters. The police might treat it as a civil matter and tell us to sue them, which gives them time to hide the money. So what do? I asked. We need them to double down, Marlene said. We need to catch them in the act of asserting ownership based on that fraud. We need a moment where they unequivocally state, in front of witnesses, that the house is theirs and you have no rights. I stared at the floral pattern on the tablecloth. I knew what she was asking. You want me to let them kick me out, I said. I want you to provoke them into trying, Marlene corrected. I want you to go back in there and be the victim they think you are. Be weak. Be confused. Be submissive. Make them feel so confident, so powerful, that they overreach. I want them to drag you out onto that porch tomorrow morning thinking they have won. Because the porch is where the camera is. I realized. Exactly, Marlene said. If they physically remove you from the property while claiming ownership, they are adding assault and wrongful eviction to the fraud charges, and they are doing it on high-definition video. It is a trap, Riley said, nodding slowly. A sting operation. I have a contact, Riley added, pulling out her phone. Officer Miller. He owes the firm a favor. He hates domestic disputes, but he hates elder abuse and fraud even more. I can have him on standby. I will draft the complaint tonight, the moment things escalate tomorrow. I text him. He can be there in 3 minutes. I took a deep breath. The plan was terrifying. It required me to walk back into that house and let them humiliate me. It required me to let Lydia scream at me, let Savannah mock me, and let my father betray me one last time, all without fighting back, until the trap snapped shut. I can do it, I said. Are you sure? Riley asked, her hand on my arm. It is going to be brutal. Nev, they are going to say things that will hurt. They have been hurting me for years, I said, standing up. Tomorrow, I stop bleeding. I returned to the house at 5 o'clock. I made sure to hunch my shoulders, to look tired and defeated. When I walked into the kitchen, Lydia was there, humming to herself as she arranged flowers in a vase I had paid for. Where have you been? She asked sharply, not looking up. Just walking, I stammered, keeping my eyes on the floor. I have a migraine. I think the stress of work is getting to me. I might lose my bonus. Lydia stopped arranging the flowers. She turned to me, her eyes lighting up with a predatory gleam. She smelled weakness. Well, she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, maybe that is a sign. Nevaeh, maybe you aren't cut out for that high-pressure life. Maybe you need a change. I don't know what to do, I whispered, forcing a tremor into my voice. We will figure it out, she said, smiling. It was the smile of a wolf looking at a limping deer. Actually, your father and I have been talking. We think it is time for a family meeting. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. A meeting? Yes, Savannah's husband, Tyler, is coming over too. We need to settle things, once and for all. Okay, I said softly. Okay, Lydia. I walked out of the room, but not before I saw her pull out her phone to text someone. She thought I was broken. She thought I was ready to sign whatever paper she put in front of me just to make the pain stop. My father walked in a moment later. Did you tell her? He asked Lydia. I told her, Lydia replied. She is a mess. Greg, she is practically shaking. Tomorrow is going to be easy. Greg looked up and saw me standing on the stairs. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He looked at the wall next to my head. Tyler will be here at 10, Greg said, his voice flat. We are going to have a talk, Nevaeh, about the future. Okay, Dad, I said. Whatever you say. I went to my room and closed the door. I didn't lock it. There was no point in locks anymore. The enemy was already inside. That night was the longest of my life. I lay on my bed, staring at the ceiling fan cutting through the dark air. The house was quiet, but my mind was screaming. I thought about the last 14 months. I calculated the numbers in my head. Not on a spreadsheet. $18,000 for the roof, $12,000 for the HVAC, $35,000 for the kitchen, $4,000 a month for household expenses. I had spent nearly $100,000 on this house. And what had I bought? I hadn't bought love. I hadn't bought a home. I had bought a front row seat to my own exploitation. I had bought designer purses for a sister who despised me. I had bought whiskey for a father who was too cowardly to look me in the eye. I felt a tear slide down my temple into my ear. I wiped it away angrily. This was not the time for grief. Grief was for people who had lost something valuable. I hadn't lost a family. I had just discovered I never had one. The walls in this house were thin. Around 11 o'clock, I heard Savannah's voice from the room next door. So, Tyler is bringing the truck? Yes, Lydia's voice answered, muffled but audible. We will have her boxes packed by noon. Tyler can drive them to a storage unit. I don't want her things cluttering up the garage. What if she refuses to leave? Savannah asked. Lydia laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. Did you see her today? She is a ghost. She has no fight left in her. Besides, if she argues, we just show her the new deed. We tell her the bank requires the primary residents to be the sole occupants. She is too stupid to know property law. God, I can't wait, Savannah giggled. I am going to film it. Her face when we tell her is going to be priceless. Watch her cry. That will be the caption. Just make sure you get my good side, Lydia said. I lay there, my hands clenching the bedsheet so hard my fingernails nearly tore through the fabric. Watch her cry. That was their plan. They wanted a show. They wanted to strip me of my dignity for content. They wanted to turn my eviction into entertainment. I sat up. The despair that had been weighing on my chest evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. They wanted a show? Fine. I would give them a performance they would never forget. I got out of bed and walked over to the closet. I reached to the very back, behind the rows of business suits that Lydia hated. I pulled out a small, battered shoebox. Inside was the only thing I had left from my biological mother: a silver locket, a few photographs, and a sealed envelope made of thick, yellowed paper. I had found it years ago, tucked inside a cookbook she had left me. I had never opened it because I wasn't ready to face her words. But after my conversation with Marlene, I knew what it was, or at least, I knew what it represented. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, dated 3 weeks before she died. My dearest Neva, if you are reading this, it means I am gone, and things have become difficult. I know your father. I loved him once, but he is a man who follows the path of least resistance. He is weak. My love and weakness, when cornered, can be dangerous. I have spoken to Marlene next door. We drafted a document together. It is not a formal will. Your father would fight that. But it is a notarized memorandum of intent regarding the house funds. It states that the money used to purchase this home came entirely from my inheritance, not your father's earnings. It states my wish that upon my death, the equity belongs to you. It might not be a deed, but combined with the truth, it is a shield. Do not let them take your home. Nevaeh, it is the only thing I can leave you. Love, Mom. I stared at the letter. It wasn't a legal deed, but it was moral ammunition. It proved that this fight had started 10 years ago. It proved that my father had known all along that this house was never truly his to give to Lydia. He had been squatting in my legacy. I folded the letter and put it into the pocket of the blazer I would wear tomorrow. I walked to the window and looked out at the street. The streetlight flickered. The house next door was dark, but I knew the camera lens was there, unblinking, waiting. "You want to see me cry?" I whispered to the empty room. I turned back to the bed. I checked my phone. One text from Riley. "Complaint drafted. Miller is on standby. Don't blink." I checked the time. 6 hours until sunrise, 10 hours until the meeting. I closed my eyes, but I didn't sleep. I visualized the morning. I visualized the porch. I visualized the look on Lydia's face when the police car turned the corner. Tomorrow, I wouldn't be the daughter. I wouldn't be the victim. I would be the storm that washed them all away. The morning sun that filtered through the blinds was deceptively bright, casting striped shadows across the living room floor. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, a time when most households were settling into the rhythm of the day. But in my father's house, the atmosphere was vibrating with a manic, surreal energy that felt less like a Tuesday and more like the backstage of a twisted reality show. When I walked down the stairs, dressed in the simple slacks and blouse I had chosen carefully for this performance, I stopped dead in my tracks. The living room had been transformed. Lydia had arranged the coffee table as if she were hosting a bridal shower. There was a bottle of pink Moscato, the kind that costs $5 at the gas station, sitting in an ice bucket. There were 4 crystal flutes, sparkling under the lights she had turned up to full brightness. There was even a platter of store-bought pastries, the frosting sweating slightly in the warm room. It was grotesque. They were throwing a party to celebrate my eviction. "Ah, she is awake," Lydia said, looking up from the bottle she was struggling to uncork. She was wearing a floral dress and a full face of makeup, her smile tight and predatory. "Perfect timing, Nevaeh. We were just about to make a toast." "A toast?" I asked, keeping my voice low and trembling. "To what?" Before she could answer, the front door swung open. My half-sister Savannah and her husband, Tyler, burst in. They brought with them a gust of cool air and an overwhelming sense of entitlement. Tyler was carrying a cluster of gold and silver balloons. Savannah was holding a cake box from a high-end bakery. "We are here!" Savannah squealed, dropping the cake on the sideboard. She looked at me, then looked through me, her eyes landing on her mother. "Did you tell her yet?" "Not yet," Lydia cooed, finally popping the cork with a loud thwack. "We were waiting for the whole family to be together." Tyler, a man who had never looked me in the eye since the day he married my sister, nodded vaguely in my direction. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, but I knew why he was here. He was a failed real estate flipper with massive debts. If my father and Lydia managed to steal this house, Tyler was the one who would help them sell it. He was the vulture circling the carcass. "Sit down, Nevaeh," Lydia commanded, pointing to the single armchair opposite the sofa. It was a staging choice designed to isolate me. They sat on the long plush sofa, Greg, Lydia, and Savannah, a united front. Tyler leaned against the mantel, crossing his arms. I sat in the armchair, clutching my hands in my lap, playing the role of the confused, frightened daughter to perfection. "We need to have a grown-up conversation," Lydia began, pouring the cheap wine into the glasses. She did not pour one for me. "About the future of this house, and your place in it." My father, Greg, cleared his throat. He reached under the coffee table and pulled out a single sheet of paper. His hands were shaking so badly the paper rattled. "Nevaeh," he said, his voice weak and watery. "You know we love you. We took you in when your marriage fell apart. We gave you a safe haven." "I paid for the roof, Dad," I whispered, injecting a note of desperation into my tone. "I paid for the kitchen." "And we appreciate that," Lydia interrupted, cutting him off. "But let us be honest. It was rent. You were living here, using our water, our electricity, taking up space. It was the least you could do." She took a sip of wine, leaving a red lipstick stain on the rim. "The thing is," Lydia continued, "this arrangement is no longer working for us. We feel stifled. Savannah and Tyler are looking for a place to settle down, maybe start a family eventually. And this house? It is a family home, a legacy home. Savannah pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen, and I saw the red recording light blink on. She held it up, framing the shot so that I looked small and pathetic in the corner while the happy family sat together. "So," Greg said, sliding the paper across the table toward me, "we think it is best if you move on, today." I looked at the paper. It was titled Voluntary Relinquishment of Tenancy and Claims. It was not a legal eviction notice, it was a waiver. I leaned forward, pretending to read it, though I already knew what it would say. I, Nevaeh Torres, hereby agree to vacate the premises immediately. I acknowledge that I have no financial interest, ownership, or claim to the property or its equity. I declare that any funds contributed to renovations were gifts, not loans or investments. I waive my right to notice and agree to leave peaceably. It was a confession. If I signed this, I would be signing away my right to sue them for the fraud. I would be validating their theft. Lydia reached over and tapped the paper with a manicured nail. "I will read the highlights for you. Since you seem a bit slow today, basically, it says you are leaving. You aren't asking for a dime, and you admit that you have just been a guest here. A guest who has overstayed her welcome." She laughed, a cruel, tinkling sound. "Oh, and this part is my favorite. I acknowledge that the owners have treated me with kindness and generosity." Savannah giggled behind her phone. "Smile, Nevaeh. You are being emancipated. Again." I looked up at them. I let my eyes fill with tears. I let my chin tremble. "But I have nowhere to go," I stammered. And I signed papers. The bank sent me letters." Lydia froze. Her eyes snapped to Greg, then back to me. "What letters?" she snapped. "The loan," I said, my voice rising slightly. "The second mortgage, my name is on it." Lydia's face twisted. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. "You are confused, honey. You are stressed. That was just paperwork for the tax assessment, remember? You signed it years ago." "But the letter said $150,000, I insisted. "Stop it!" Lydia slammed her hand on the table, making the wine glasses jump. "There is no loan. You are imagining things. You are hysterical, just like your mother was." Savannah moved closer, zooming in on my face. "God, she is so dramatic. This is why her husband left her. Who could live with this?" I took a deep breath. I needed them to say it. I needed the audio evidence for the trap Marlene and I had set. "Okay," I said, wiping my eyes. "If I sign this, if I leave, I just want to know one thing." "What?" Greg asked, looking miserable. "In the official records," I asked, looking directly at my father, "who owns this house? Is it me, or is it you?" The room went silent. The air conditioner hummed. Lydia laughed. It was a loud, victorious bark of a laugh. She looked straight into Savannah's camera lens, then at me. "You?" she mocked. "You think you own this house? You are nothing. Nevaeh, you are a signature on a check. Nothing more. This house belongs to Greg and me. It has always been ours. It will always be ours. You are just the help we let sleep inside." "So my name is not on the deed?" I pressed. "Definitely not," Lydia declared, grinning. "You have zero rights here. Now sign the paper." "Got you." She had just denied my ownership on video while secretly using my name to secure the debt. It was the final nail in the coffin of their defense. I looked at the pen lying on the table, a cheap, plastic ballpoint pen. I reached out my hand. Lydia's eyes widened in anticipation. Savannah leaned in. Tyler watched from the fireplace, looking bored. I picked up the pen. I held it over the signature line. Then I set it down. "No," I said. The word hung in the air like a slap. "Excuse me?" Lydia whispered. "No," I said, louder this time. I sat up straighter. I dropped the act of the trembling victim just enough to show the steel underneath. "I am not signing that, and I am not leaving." Lydia stared at me. For a moment, She didn't know how to process the defiance. Then, her face turned a mottled, ugly shade of red. "You little bitch!" she screamed. She lunged across the table. She didn't grab the paper. She grabbed my wrist. Her nails dug into my skin, sharp and painful. "You are leaving!" she shrieked, yanking me forward. "You are getting out of my house right now!" "Lydia, stop!" Greg shouted, half rising from the sofa, but he didn't move to intervene. Lydia was strong, fueled by a rage that had been simmering for months. She pulled me up from the chair. I stumbled, my hip checking the coffee table, knocking over a glass of wine. The pink liquid splashed across the rug I had bought. "Get off me!" I yelled, pulling back. "Tyler, help me!" Lydia screamed. Tyler took a step forward, but he stopped when I shot him a look. He was a coward. He wasn't going to put his hands on me. But Lydia? Lydia had no such reservations. She grabbed a handful of my hair. "You ungrateful, barren, useless leech," she spat, her face inches from mine. "You couldn't keep a man, so you came here to steal mine? Is that it? You think you can buy your daddy's love with a new kitchen? He hates you. We all hate you." She shoved me, hard. I wasn't expecting the force of it. I stumbled backward, my feet tangling in the rug. I fell hard onto the hardwood floor, my elbow slamming against the wood. Pain shot up my arm. "Mom!" Savannah laughed, the sound high and frantic. "Oh my God, this is gold. Drag her out." I looked up from the floor. My cheek was burning where she had slapped me in the scuffle. My arm throbbed. Lydia stood over me, breathing heavy, her chest heaving. She looked insane. The mask of the suburban housewife had completely slipped. "Get up," she hissed. "Get up and get out before I call the police." I slowly pushed myself up to a sitting position. I looked at my father. He was standing there, watching. He saw his wife assault his daughter, and he did nothing. He just looked sad. I looked at Savannah. She was still filming, a cruel smile plastered on her face. I looked at Lydia. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," I whispered. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. Lydia's eyes bulged. "Mistake? The only mistake was letting you in the door." She reached down and grabbed the collar of my blouse. She hauled me to my feet with surprising strength. "You want to make a scene?" she screamed. "Fine, let's make a scene. Let's show the whole neighborhood what kind of trash you are." She dragged me toward the front door. I stumbled along with her, not fighting back. This was the plan. This was the moment. I needed to be on the porch. I needed to be in the frame of Marlene's camera. "Open the door, Tyler," Lydia commanded. Tyler, looking pale, opened the front door. The bright morning light flooded the entryway. Lydia shoved me through the doorway. "Out!" she screamed. We spilled out onto the concrete porch, the same porch where I had entered countless times with groceries, with gifts, with hope. Now, it was the stage for my public execution. Lydia didn't stop. She followed me out. Savannah followed. Phone raised high. Greg stood in the doorway, a ghost haunting his own crime. Lydia grabbed my arm again, digging her heel into the concrete, preparing to throw me down the steps. "Everyone look!" she shouted to the empty street, her voice cracking. "Look at this freeloader! Look at this failure!" She raised her hand to strike me again. And that was when the trap snapped shut. From the corner of my eye, I saw the movement. Click. The sound of the neighbor's door opening was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Marlene Cooper stepped out. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't smiling. The camera lens of her phone was pointed directly at Lydia's raised hand, and behind her, the sun glinted off the badge of the uniformed officer stepping out of the shadows of her entryway. Lydia's hand froze in midair. Her mouth hung open. But it was too late. She was already on stage, and the audience had just arrived. The sound of Marlene's door opening was not just a click. In that suspended moment, it sounded like the gavel striking a judge's bench. The world seemed to slow down. Lydia's hand was still raised, her face contorted in a mask of pure, unfiltered malice. My father stood in the doorway, a portrait of weak complicity. Savannah's phone was still recording, capturing every pixel of their cruelty, and I lay on the concrete, my elbow throbbing, looking up at the woman who had just changed the script. Marlene Cooper stepped onto her porch. She was not the gardening widow they dismissed. She stood tall, her posture rigid with authority. In her hand, her phone was steady, recording us. But she was not alone. Stepping out from behind her was a man I had never seen before. He was tall, wearing a crisp navy suit that cost more than my father's car. He held a thick black briefcase in one hand and a stack of files in the other. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "That is enough, Lydia," Marlene said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the suburban morning air with the precision of a scalpel. "Step away from her, now." Lydia blinked, the spell of her rage momentarily broken. She looked at Marlene, then at the man, then back at me. She sneered, trying to regain her footing. "Go back inside, Marlene," Lydia shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is a private family matter. Get your nose out of my business before I call the cops on you for harassment." "I would welcome the police," Marlene replied calmly, walking down her steps and crossing the property line onto our driveway. The man followed her, his expression unreadable. "In fact, I believe they are already on their way. But until they arrive, I suggest you stop assaulting the woman who has paid for the roof over your head." "She didn't pay for anything," Lydia spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "She is a leech. This is our house. We own it. We are the only ones on the deed." The man in the suit stopped 3 feet from the porch. He adjusted his glasses and looked at Lydia with a level of professional disdain that was almost beautiful. "Thank you for clarifying that for the record, Mrs. Torres," he said. His voice was deep, smooth, and terrified me with its competence. "My name is Ethan Cooper. I am Mrs. Cooper's son. I am also a senior partner at Cooper and Sterling, specializing in property litigation and fraud." The color drained from Lydia's face. The name Cooper and Sterling was well known in Denver. They were the kind of firm you hired when you wanted to destroy someone, not just sue them. Ethan lifted the file in his hand. "You just stated, on video, that you are the sole owners of this property. Is that correct?" "Yes," Lydia insisted, though her voice wavered. "Greg and I, sole owners." "Interesting," Ethan said, opening the file. "Because according to the deed of trust recorded with the Denver County Clerk on July 15th, there is a third borrower on the second mortgage of this property, a borrower named Nevaeh Torres." He pulled out a document, the same one I had found, but this was a certified copy with the raised seal of the court. "This loan is for $150,000, Ethan continued, reading from the page. "It is secured by the equity in this home, and it bears 3 signatures, yours, your husband's, and Nevaeh's." My father, Greg, made a choking sound. He leaned against the doorframe, looking like he might vomit. Ethan looked up, his eyes locking onto my father. "Now, here is the problem. Mr. Torres, if you are the sole owners, as your wife just screamed for the entire neighborhood to hear, then why is your daughter's name on a $150,000 liability? And more importantly, why does her signature appear on a document signed in Denver on a day when she was visibly and verifiably in Chicago?" The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush bones. Savannah lowered her phone. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of dawning horror. She looked at her mother. "Mom? What is he talking about?" Lydia's mouth opened and closed. She looked at the document, then at Ethan, then at me. It was a mistake," she stammered. "A clerical error. Nevaeh. She verbally agreed. She told us to do it." "Did she?" Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because verbal authorization does not permit you to forge a signature on a federally regulated loan document. That is not a mistake. Mrs. Torres, that is a felony. Specifically bank fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy." I slowly pushed myself up from the concrete. My arm hurt, but I didn't feel it. I felt light. I felt powerful. I reached into the pocket of my torn blouse. My fingers brushed against the cool, smooth paper of the envelope I had retrieved the night before. I didn't agree to anything, I said. My voice was quiet, but in the silence, it sounded like a shout. I pulled out the yellowed paper, my mother's letter, the memorandum of intent. And neither did the person who actually paid for this house, I added. I walked up the steps, past a frozen Lydia, and stood in front of my father. I held the paper up. "Do you recognize this, Dad?" I asked. Greg looked at the paper. His eyes widened. He knew exactly what it was. He had spent 10 years hoping it would never resurface. That is your mother's handwriting," he whispered. "It is a memorandum of intent," Marlene spoke up from the driveway. "Signed by your late wife and witnessed by me, 10 years ago. It states clearly that the funds used to purchase this home came from her personal inheritance, and that her intent was for the equity to pass to Nevaeh. You blocked the formal trust. Greg, you bullied a dying woman, but you didn't destroy the evidence of her wishes." Ethan stepped forward. "This document establishes a constructive trust claim," he explained. "It proves that Nevaeh has a beneficial interest in this property that predates your marriage to Lydia, combined with the fact that she has paid for the recent renovations, which we have receipts for, and the fact that you just tried to defraud her. Well," he paused, letting the weight of the legal threat hang in the air. "We aren't just looking at jail time, Greg. We are looking at a complete asset seizure. Everything you own, everything Lydia owns. It will all go to paying back the fraudulent loan and compensating Nevaeh for damages." Lydia let out a strangled cry. "You can't do this. This is our home. You are twisting everything." "Am I?" Ethan asked. He turned to Marlene. "Mom, play the clip from last Tuesday." Marlene tapped her phone screen. A video began to play. The volume was turned up to the maximum. Lydia's voice, tinny but unmistakable, floated from the speaker. Video. "Lydia, who cares about the rates? We aren't paying them. We use Nevaeh's credit info. We trigger the clause. We make life hell for her. By the time she figures it out, we will be in Florida." The color didn't just drain from Lydia's face, it vanished. She looked like a corpse. Savannah dropped her phone. It hit the concrete with a crack. "You," Savannah whispered, staring at her mother. "You said it was legal. You said Nevaeh knew." "She lied to you too." "Savannah," I said, looking at my sister. "She put me in debt for $150,000 so she could buy you purses and trips to Aspen. And now? Now you are an accessory." Savannah stepped back, shaking her head. No, I didn't sign anything. I just held the camera." "You participated in the harassment," Ethan noted coldly. "You recorded the eviction attempt. You are part of the conspiracy." Greg finally moved. He pushed himself off the doorframe and stumbled toward Ethan. "Please," he begged, his voice breaking. "Please, don't call the police. We can fix this. We can pay it back. I will sell the boat. I will do anything." "It is a little late for that." "Greg," Marlene said, her voice filled with disappointment. "You let your wife beat your daughter on your front porch. You watched. You did nothing." Ethan looked at his watch. "The police are 3 minutes out. Officer Miller is a friend of a colleague. He has seen the preliminary file." He looked at Greg, then at Lydia. "Here is your situation," Ethan said. "The bank is going to find out about the fraud. That is inevitable. But right now, you have a choice about how you leave this porch. You can leave in handcuffs, charged with felony assault and fraud. Or—" He looked at me. "Or what?" Lydia whispered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "Or you leave voluntarily," I said. They all turned to me. I stood on the top step, looking down at them. I looked at Lydia, who was trembling. I looked at Savannah, who was crying silently. I looked at Tyler, who was trying to inch away toward his truck. And I looked at my father, who looked like a broken man. "I am the one on the loan," I said. "I am the one liable for the debt you created, which means, in the eyes of the bank, I am the one with the most to lose. I took a deep breath. I am willing to drop the assault charges, I said, and I am willing to hold off on pressing criminal fraud charges immediately, but only on one condition. What? Greg asked, hope flickering in his eyes. You leave, I said. Right now, you pack a bag, you get in your car, and you get off my property. You sign a quitclaim deed transferring your interest in the house to me, which is really just giving me back what you stole. You assume full responsibility for the loan payments in a separate legal agreement, or I will hand the evidence to the FBI. You want us to move out? Lydia gasped. Today? Not today, I corrected. Now, you have 20 minutes before the police arrive. If you are still here when Officer Miller pulls up, I show him the video of you slapping me, and I hand him the fraud file. Lydia looked at the house, her sanctuary, her stage. You can't be serious, she sobbed. Where will we go? I don't care, I said. Go to a hotel. Go to Savannah's apartment. Go to hell for all I care. But you aren't staying here. I looked at Tyler. And you, I said. If you ever come near this property again, I will sue you for trespassing and conspiracy. Get in your truck and leave. Tyler didn't wait. He turned and practically ran to his vehicle. He started the engine and peeled out of the driveway, leaving his wife behind. Tyler! Savannah screamed, but he was gone. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance. Faint, but getting louder. Ethan looked at Greg. You hear that, Greg? That is the sound of consequences. You have about 10 minutes left. Greg looked at Lydia, then he looked at me. For the first time in years, I saw clarity in his eyes. He realized that Lydia couldn't save him. He realized that he had bet on the wrong horse, and the race was over. Okay, Greg whispered. Okay, we will go. Greg, Lydia shrieked. You can't let her do this. Shut up, Lydia, Greg roared. It was the first time I had ever heard him raise his voice at her. Just shut up. Do you want to go to prison? Because I don't. He looked at me. I will sign. I will sign whatever you want. I nodded. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the pen. The cheap plastic pen I had refused to use earlier. Good, I said, because the paperwork is already drafted. I looked at Ethan. He smiled and opened his briefcase, pulling out a fresh stack of documents. Shall we? Ethan asked. I looked at my family. They were broken. They were defeated. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was afraid. Yes, I said. Let's finish this. Ethan Cooper stood on the concrete walkway, a calm island in the middle of a hurricane. He adjusted his cuffs, the sunlight glinting off his watch, and looked at my father and stepmother with the detached sympathy of a mortician. He did not shout. He did not posture. He simply laid out the reality of their situation with a terrifying precision. Here are your options, Ethan said, his voice carrying clearly over the sound of Lydia's ragged breathing. Option 1 is that you cease this eviction immediately. You acknowledge Nevaeh's residency and her financial contributions. You agree to a full forensic audit of the household finances, and you cooperate fully with the investigation into the fraudulent loan. He paused, letting the words sink in. Option 2, he continued, lifting his phone, is that I make a call. I have a contact in the Economic Crimes Division who is already briefed on the situation. If I make that call, this ceases to be a negotiation and becomes a crime scene. You will be arrested for bank fraud, identity theft, and assault. And given the amount of money involved, over $150,000, you will be looking at mandatory prison time. Lydia let out a strangled sound, half sob, half scream. She took a step forward, her face mottled with red blotches of rage and panic. You cannot do that, she shrieked, waving her hands frantically. This is a family matter. It is private. We are resolving a domestic dispute. You have no right to involve the police in our personal business. She looked around wild-eyed, as if expecting the neighborhood to rise up in her defense, but the street remained silent, save for the hum of distant traffic. Marlene Cooper stepped forward then. She looked at Lydia with eyes that held 35 years of experience in watching people lie in courtrooms. "Lydia," Marlene said, her voice cutting through the hysteria like a blade of ice. "Arguments about who takes out the trash are family matters. Arguments about curfew are family matters. Forging a signature to steal 6 figures from a bank is not a family matter. It is a felony. And assaulting a woman on her own front porch because she caught you stealing? That is not private. That is public safety." "It is our house," Lydia yelled again, though the conviction in her voice was cracking. "We can do what we want with the equity. We raised her. She owes us." That was the spark. I had been standing silently, nursing my throbbing elbow, listening to them debate my fate. But when Lydia claimed I owed them, after everything I had given, something inside me finally broke. It wasn't a break of weakness. It was the breaking of a dam. I stepped forward. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. My voice was low, steady, and cold enough to freeze the air between us. "I owe you?" I asked. Lydia stopped screaming. She looked at me, startled by the sudden shift in my demeanor. "I paid $18,000 for the roof over your head because Greg said the leaks were ruining his antique books," I said, ticking the item off on my finger. "I paid $12,000 for the new HVAC system because you complained the draft was hurting your joints. I paid $35,000 to renovate a kitchen I barely use so you could host your book club and pretend you were wealthy." I took a step closer to my father. He flinched. "I paid off your credit card debt. Dad, $7,000. You told me it was a mistake with the billing, but I saw the statements. It was liquor and golf clubs. I paid it anyway because I didn't want you to be stressed." I turned to Savannah, who was shrinking back against the railing. "And I have been paying $4,000 a month into the household account. Money that was supposed to go to utilities and taxes. Money that I now know went to your wardrobe, your car payments, and your trips to Aspen." I looked back at Lydia. "I have poured nearly $100,000 into this pit," I said. "I have given you my savings. I have given you my labor, and in return, you stole my identity. You put me on the hook for another $150,000 without my consent, and then, when you thought I was dry, you tried to throw me into the street like garbage." I stared into Lydia's eyes. "I don't owe you a thing, Lydia. But you? You owe me everything." My father, Greg, wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked from Ethan to me, his eyes darting nervously. He tried to laugh, a weak, pathetic sound. "Now, Nevaeh," he stammered, holding up his hands. "Let's not get dramatic. Lydia, well, you know how she gets with money. She panics. She didn't mean any harm. And Savannah, she is young. She made mistakes." He looked at me with a pleading expression that made my stomach turn. "It wasn't me, sweetheart. You know me. I wouldn't do that to you. I just signed what Lydia put in front of me. I didn't know it was a loan. I thought it was insurance papers." "Stop lying, Greg," Marlene said. She held up her phone. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "I have the audio from 3 weeks ago," Marlene announced. "Do you want to hear it? Do you want to hear what you said to Lydia when she asked if you felt guilty?" Greg went pale. "Marlene, please." Marlene pressed play. My father's voice, clear and distinct, floated out from the tiny speaker. "Use her name, Lydia. Just do it. She owes me. I raised her after her mother died. She owes me her life. If we have to burn her credit to save the house, so be it. She can rebuild. We don't have time." The recording ended. The silence on the porch was absolute. I looked at my father, the man who had bought me ice cream when I scraped my knee, the man who had walked me down the aisle at my wedding. "She owes me her life," I repeated, the words tasting like poison. "That is what you think a child is. Dad, an insurance policy, a piggy bank you can break open when you fail?" Greg opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked down at his shoes. He couldn't even look me in the eye. Ethan checked his watch. He looked at me. He didn't speak, but the question was in his eyes. "Are you ready?" I looked at the trio before me, the wicked stepmother, the entitled sister, the cowardly father. They weren't a family. They were a syndicate. I nodded to Ethan. Ethan withdrew his phone from his pocket. He didn't scroll through contacts. He hit a single button, a speed dial. "Officer Miller?" Ethan said into the phone, his eyes never leaving Lydia's face. "This is Ethan Cooper. We are at the Torres residence, 428 Maplewood. Yes, the situation has escalated. We have an assault, and we have confirmation of the fraud. We need you now." Lydia lunged. It was an act of pure, desperate instinct. She realized in that second that the walls were closing in, that her narrative was collapsing, and that the man in the suit held the power to destroy her. "Give me that!" she screamed, throwing herself at Ethan, trying to grab the file folder tucked under his arm. "That is my property. You can't have it." Ethan didn't flinch. He simply stepped back, turning his shoulder so Lydia grabbed nothing but air. She stumbled, her heels clattering on the concrete, and nearly fell off the porch. "Assaulting an attorney is a bad idea, Mrs. Torres," Ethan said dryly. "But please, continue. It adds color to the police report." "You are ruining everything," Lydia howled, turning on me. "You ungrateful little brat. Call them off. Tell them it was a mistake." "It wasn't a mistake," I said. And then, the world was bathed in blue and red. A cruiser pulled up to the curb, moving fast but silent. The lights on the roof bar were flashing, reflecting wildly against the front windows of the house, turning the slate blue paint into a disco ball of emergency colors. The car door opened. A uniformed officer stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that looked like it was carved from granite. He adjusted his belt and walked up the driveway with a purposeful stride. This was Officer Miller, Riley's contact. Lydia froze. Her hands, which had been reaching for me again, dropped to her sides. "Oh, God," Savannah whispered. "Oh, my God." Officer Miller walked up the steps. He looked at the scene. He saw me, clutching my bruised arm. He saw Lydia, red-faced and panting. He saw Greg cowering in the doorway. And he saw Ethan and Marlene, standing like sentinels with their evidence. "Mr. Cooper?" Officer Miller nodded. "Is everyone safe?" "For the moment," Ethan said. "But we have a volatile situation. This is Mrs. Lydia Torres. She just physically assaulted her stepdaughter, Nevaeh Torres, in an attempt to forcibly evict her from the premises. And we have evidence that this eviction is an attempt to cover up a fraudulent mortgage obtained in Nevaeh's name." Officer Miller turned his gaze to Lydia. "Is that true, ma'am?" "No," Lydia cried, her voice rising an octave. "No, he is lying. They are all lying. This is my house. I was just asking her to leave. She tripped. She is clumsy." Ethan handed the black binder to the officer. "I have the deed of trust here. Officer, it bears Nevaeh's signature, dated October 12th. I also have Nevaeh's flight records proving she was in Chicago on that date. And I have a video recording from the neighbor's security camera showing Mrs. Torres practicing Nevaeh's signature on this very porch." Officer Miller took the binder. He opened it, flipping through the pages with practiced efficiency. He looked at the signature. He looked at the flight manifest. He looked up at Greg. "Sir," the officer said, "are you Gregory Torres?" "Yes," my father whispered. "Did you sign this document?" Miller asked, tapping the deed. Greg looked at Lydia. Lydia was staring at him with a manic intensity, silently willing him to lie, to save her, to fix it. "Greg," Lydia hissed, tell him Nevaeh gave us permission." Greg looked at the officer. Then he looked at the flashing lights of the patrol car. Then he looked at the camera Marlene was still holding. Greg started. He swallowed hard. "I signed it, but Lydia told me it was legal." "You coward!" Lydia screamed, shoving him. "You spineless coward! You were right there with me." "Ma'am, step back," Officer Miller barked, his hand resting on his belt. "Do not touch him." He turned back to Ethan. "This looks like enough for probable cause on the fraud, and I witnessed the aggressive behavior myself upon arrival." He pulled a notepad from his pocket and began to write. The scratching of the pen was the only sound in the world. Savannah suddenly burst into tears. It wasn't the fake crying she used for her videos. This was real, ugly, terrified sobbing. She rushed toward me, grabbing my hand. "Neve, please," she begged, her mascara running down her cheeks. "Please don't let them arrest Mom. Please, we are family. You can't put your own family in jail. Think about what people will say. Think about Dad." I looked at her hand gripping mine, the same hand that had held the camera while she mocked me 10 minutes ago. "Family?" I asked, pulling my hand away as if I had been burned. "Yes," Savannah sobbed. "We are sisters. Don't destroy us." I looked at her. I looked at the tears. I felt nothing. The well of sympathy I had drawn from for 14 months was dry. "I didn't destroy this family, Savannah," I said. My voice was calm, but it carried the weight of every dollar stolen, every insult swallowed. "This family was destroyed the moment you decided to sell my future to pay for your handbags. You didn't want a sister, you wanted a sponsor, and I am canceling the subscription." Savannah recoiled as if I had slapped her. Officer Miller finished writing. He looked up. He looked at me, taking in the bruise forming on my arm and the redness on my cheek. "Ms. Torres," the officer said, addressing me directly, "I have enough here to take both Mr. and Mrs. Torres into custody right now for domestic assault and suspicion of fraud. However, given the nature of the dispute regarding the property, I need to know how you want to proceed regarding the residence." He paused, looking at the house, then back at me. "Do you feel unsafe here?" he asked. "Do you want to leave and have us escort you to a safe location while we process the charges?" I looked at the house, my house, the house my mother had paid for, the house I had fixed. I looked at Lydia, who was trembling with rage and fear. I looked at Greg, who was staring at the ground. "No," I said, "I don't want to leave." The officer nodded. "Okay, then, do you want them to leave?" The question hung in the air. It was a transfer of power so absolute it was dizzying. 10 minutes ago, I was being dragged out the door. Now, I held the keys to their fate. I looked at Lydia. For the first time, she wasn't looking at me with contempt. She was looking at me with fear. She knew that I held the power to strip her of everything: her home, her reputation, her freedom. "Well, Ms. Torres?" the officer asked. "It is your call. If you are the victim of domestic violence and have a claim to the home, I can remove the aggressors immediately." I stood up straighter. The pain in my arms seemed to fade, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. "Yes," I said. "I want them gone." I looked past the shoulder of Officer Miller, staring into the open mouth of the house that had consumed the last 2 years of my life. The morning light was filtering through the hallway, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I could see the kitchen island where I had eaten breakfast alone while my family whispered behind my back. I could see the expensive oak dining table I had purchased, the one Lydia claimed was a family heirloom. I saw the framed photographs on the wall, pictures of Greg and Lydia smiling in Cabo, pictures of Savannah graduating high school, pictures of a family that had erased me from the frame long before they tried to erase my name from the deed. It did not look like a home anymore. It looked like a stage set where a tragedy had been performed, and now the curtain was finally coming down. I turned back to face them. My father, Greg, was slumped against the brickwork, looking like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Lydia was panting, her eyes darting between the police officer and the document in Ethan's hand. Savannah was wiping mascara from her cheeks, looking at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I reached into the manila envelope one last time. My hand brushed against the cool paper. I pulled out a document that Riley had drafted at 3 a.m. the night before. It was crisp, white, and terrifyingly final. "This is not a negotiation," I said, my voice steady. "And this is not a debate. You have a choice to make, and you have exactly 60 seconds to make it." I held the paper out. "This is a settlement and vacancy agreement," I explained. "It states that you, Gregory and Lydia Torres, acknowledge that you forged my signature on the deed of trust. It states that you agree to vacate this property immediately. It states that you relinquish all residency rights and grant me full possession of the home to manage the asset and the debt attached to it. Lydia's eyes bulged. You want us to sign a confession? You are insane. I am pragmatic, I corrected her. Because here is the alternative. You refuse to sign. Officer Miller arrests you right now for felony assault and battery. Then, Ethan hands over the fraud file to the district attorney. You spend tonight in a holding cell. You spend the next 6 months fighting a federal case you will lose, and you lose the house anyway. Ethan stepped forward, his voice the picture of reasonable authority. He looked at Officer Miller, then at the family. Think of this as the mercy option, Ethan said. If you sign, Nevaeh agrees to advocate for a non-custodial sentence regarding the fraud. Provided you cooperate fully with the repayment plan and the investigation, she agrees not to press charges for the assault that happened 5 minutes ago. You walk away with your freedom, if not your dignity. We go to jail if we don't sign? Savannah squeaked, grabbing her mother's arm. Mom, you have to sign it. I am not signing away my house, Lydia screamed, pulling her arm away. This is a trick. Greg, tell them it is our house. My father looked up. He looked at Lydia, the woman who had driven a wedge between him and his only child. He looked at the police officer, whose hand was resting casually near his handcuffs. Greg, Lydia pleaded, desperate now. Fight for us. Officer Miller cleared his throat. It was a deep, rumbling sound. Ma'am, I have witnessed you strike this woman. I have probable cause for the fraud. If you do not sign this agreement which the victim is graciously offering, I am obligated to take you into custody. I am tired of waiting. Hands behind your back, please. He reached for his belt. The metallic click of the handcuffs being unlatched echoed on the porch. That sound broke them. No, Savannah screamed. Mom, stop it. Just sign the paper. I cannot have you in jail. My friends will see it on the news. Lydia looked at Savannah. Even in her panic, the realization hit her. Her daughter was not worried about her mother. She was worried about her reputation. It was a poetic sort of justice. Greg pushed himself off the wall. He walked toward me. His steps were heavy, shuffling. He looked at the pen in my hand. I am sorry, Nevaeh, he whispered. His voice was cracked, broken. I never wanted it to be like this. You made it like this, Dad, I said, my face impassive. When you chose her greed over my future, sign the paper. I handed him the clipboard Ethan provided. Greg took the pen. His hand was shaking so violently that the tip of the pen danced on the paper. He didn't look at Lydia. He didn't look at the house. He signed his name, Gregory Torres. He handed the clipboard back to me, tears streaming down his face. He looked small. He looked weak. And for the first time, I felt the weight of his authority vanish. I was no longer the child seeking approval. I was the adult granting mercy. Lydia, Ethan said, holding out the clipboard to her. Your turn. Lydia stared at the pen. She looked at the officer, who was holding the handcuffs open. She looked at the neighbors who were starting to peek out of their windows. She snatched the clipboard. I hope you rot in this house, she hissed at me, tears of rage cutting tracks through her foundation. I hope you are miserable here alone. I have been miserable here for 14 months with you, I replied calmly. I think I will like the silence. Lydia scribbled her signature, slashing the pen across the paper so hard it nearly tore. She shoved the clipboard at Ethan. Officer, Ethan said, turning to Miller, would you mind witnessing these signatures? Just to ensure there is no question later about whether they were coerced. Happy to, Officer Miller said. He took the clipboard, signed his name as a witness, and dated it. He handed the document to me. I held it. It was light, just a few sheets of paper, but it felt heavier than the house itself. It was the deed to my freedom. Officer Miller turned back to the family. His demeanor shifted from observer to enforcer. All right, he announced, checking his watch. The agreement says immediate vacancy. That means tonight. You have until sundown to gather your personal effects, clothing, toiletries, medications, no furniture, no appliances, no electronics other than personal cell phones. Sundown? Lydia gasped. That is 4 hours away. We cannot pack a whole house in 4 hours. You are not packing a house, I corrected her. You are packing your bags. The furniture stays. I paid for the sofa. I paid for the dining table. I paid for the television. You take what you came with, nothing more. This is illegal, Tyler shouted from the safety of the street, having looped his truck back around but staying inside the cab. It is a civil contract signed in the presence of law enforcement, Ethan called out. Drive away, Tyler, before we add you to the conspiracy indictment. Tyler rolled up his window. Greg looked at me one last time. Where will we go? You have the boat, don't you? I said, my voice devoid of malice but stripped of all warmth. The one you bought with your retirement fund? Maybe you can sleep there. Greg flinched. He nodded slowly. Come on, Lydia. Come on, Savannah. He turned and walked into the house, looking like a ghost haunting his own funeral. Lydia followed him, sobbing loudly, cursing my name with every breath. Savannah looked at me, opened her mouth to speak, perhaps to ask for money or a place to stay, but she saw the look in my eyes and closed it again. She followed her parents inside. I stood on the porch. The adrenaline that had been fueling me began to ebb, leaving behind a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But it was a good exhaustion. It was the feeling of having run a marathon and crossing the finish line. I turned to Marlene. She was standing by the railing. Her camera finally lowered. She looked at me, and her stern face softened. A genuine smile touched her lips, erasing the lines of cynicism. You did good, kid, Marlene said softly. You stood your ground. I almost didn't, I admitted, leaning against the porch column. I almost signed their waiver just to make the screaming stop. But you didn't, Marlene said. She reached out and patted my hand. Your mother. She would be proud of you today. You did not let them break you. You did not let the evil win. But you also didn't let it turn you into a monster. You gave them a way out. That takes grace. It wasn't grace, I said, looking at the door through which my family had disappeared. It was just, I didn't want their hate to live in this house anymore. I wanted them gone. Same thing, Marlene winked. Now, Ethan and I will stay right here until they are out. We will make sure they don't take the copper wiring. I smiled, a real smile. Thank you, Marlene, for everything. The next 4 hours were a blur of activity. I sat on the porch swing, the one I had bought last summer, and watched as my father and stepmother carried suitcases and boxes to their cars. Officer Miller stayed by his cruiser, a silent sentinel ensuring order. Lydia tried to take the silver tea set. I stopped her. That stays, I said. Savannah tried to take the designer lamp from the living room. Receipt? I asked. She didn't have one. She put it back. By 6 o'clock, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. The house felt lighter. It felt like the walls were exhaling. Greg carried the last box to his car. He hesitated by the driver's door. He looked back at the house, then at me. He raised a hand in a half-hearted wave, a gesture of apology that was 10 years too late. I didn't wave back. I just watched. Lydia glared at me from the passenger seat, her face puffy and red. Savannah was in the back, typing furiously on her phone, probably already spinning a story for her followers about how she was the victim of a family tragedy. They backed out of the driveway. I watched the taillights of my father's car fade down the street, turning the corner and vanishing from sight. They were gone. The silence that followed was profound. It wasn't the stifling silence of secrets and walking on eggshells. It was the clean, crisp silence of ownership. Officer Miller walked up to the porch. They are clear. Ms. Torres, do you need anything else? No, officer, I said. Thank you, truly. He tipped his cap and walked to his car. Ethan snapped his briefcase shut. I will file the quitclaim deed first thing in the morning, and I will send the repayment agreement to the bank. You are safe now, Nevaeh. Thank you, Ethan, I said. He walked down the steps, joining his mother. Marlene looked back one last time. Don't forget to change the locks, dear, she called out. First thing on the list, I promised. They walked back to their house, the door closing behind them with a solid, comforting click. I was alone. I turned and faced the front door. My front door. I walked across the threshold. The house was quiet. The air smelled of the lavender cleaning spray Lydia favored. But underneath that, I could smell the dust of the old house, the house my mother had loved. I walked into the living room. The bottle of cheap pink Moscato was still on the table. I picked it up and poured it down the kitchen sink. I rinsed the glass. I walked to the center of the room. I looked at the sofa I had paid for. I looked at the walls I had painted. I didn't feel lonely. I felt spacious. I walked back to the front door. I stood there for a moment, looking out at the street, at the neighborhood that had witnessed my humiliation and my vindication. I took a deep breath of the cool evening air. I placed my hand on the doorknob. It felt cool and solid beneath my palm. From now on, I whispered to the empty room, to the walls, to the memory of my mother, and to the future that was finally mine. This is my house. I stepped back and swung the door shut. The lock clicked into place, sealing out the world, sealing out the past. The story was over. My life was just beginning. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on whether Neve made the right choice. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Lila Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and hit that hype button so we can share this journey with even more people.